So we'll begin with the invoking wisdom in the form of the Bodhisattva Manjushri. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind. Enlighten my intelligence and wisdom so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. So we are back with Jigme Lingpa's Treasury of Precious Qualities. And since it's been a while, I'm just going to go very briefly over the particular section that we have arrived at, which is the paramita of wisdom, which really gives which is really the culmination of the paramita vehicle. So we can in general say the Mahayana can be understood in terms of the practice of the 6 paramitas. And we've been covering that in this chapter here. And now we are within the category of, or rather within the chapter of wisdom, then we talk about the wisdom of hearing, the wisdom of reflecting, meaning thinking critically about what we've listened to and how it relates to our experience. And then we're going to be looking at, or we are now arrived at what's called the wisdom. Well, actually, the wisdom resulting from reflection is the second one. So that's where we think critically, and we need to have then an understanding, which then becomes the foundation for the wisdom of meditation. So wisdom is that which cuts through our confusion. So you could say wisdom is really the essence of everything that we're doing in the Buddhist path in terms of dismantling or cutting through the confusion that drives samsara, our suffering. So here we looked at first the wisdom of hearing contains 2 sections. One is that explains what kind of teachings there are. There are many different kinds of teachings and understanding how they should be understood. And the second is more the categories. And that's where we, particularly when it comes to wisdom, we look at the categories or the tenets, which are the systems that you could say increasingly, in a more increasingly subtle way, understand the nature of reality. And that's where we talked about 4 systems, even though it says 5 here. I know it's confusing because the last one, the Madhyamika, has two aspects to it. But we generally talk about the Vaibhashika, the Sautrantika, the Chittamatra, and the Madhyamika. And so we've discussed that. And then we've now arrived at the wisdom of reflection, resulting from reflection. That's sort of that's where we would like to get to, the wisdom that is the outcome of reflecting. But that's where we're looking at then, particularly what is the key element to understand the nature of reality in the Buddhist teaching, which is simply understanding dependent arising, where we in the Western, modern, but also ancient Western tradition have always looked for what we could call sort of an ontological absolute, the absolute stuff in physics, and also the absolute in terms of spirituality, like a God. And where the Buddha pointed out, reality is simply not like that. What we have in reality is always a set of related causes and conditions. And that's what creates what we experience in terms of appearances. But because there's not really an absolute unchanging essence in any of what appears, it goes contrary to what we think there is. We think there is a solid essence in terms of our person. We think there's a solid essence in terms of what we perceive. And so we have all these patterns of accepting and rejecting, attraction and aversion. So that's where the Buddha comes in and says, hello, it's not what it looks like. And that's where he says, what you have is really just a set of just ever-changing causes and conditions that have no reality in itself. And that's where we talk about there's no existence. And that's where in the Indian tradition, then recently I was listening to our brilliant Dharma brother, Woolston Fletcher, who was on a similar topic. He was talking about this what we're talking about here, the absence of inherent existence. And he made this point that in the Indian context, and obviously particularly in the Buddhist context, what we mean with existence doesn't mean that there's not something appearing, but what it means is that there is something that is unchanging, solid, essential, monolithic, permanent, all of that, which is what we actually are continually sort of drawn to or repulsed by in more or less strong degrees. And that comes from this asserting an existence on what we perceive, asserting an existence on our person. And that's where something needs to be done. And that's where the Buddha says, what you have is all simply dependent arising. So let's look at what Jigme Lingpa says in this regard. You'll apologize, my computer's a bit slow. He says here, okay, all arises in dependence. This, of all the Dharma, is the treasure. To understand and penetrate this well through wisdom based upon reflection is the key to all the teachings, all without exception. Everything that might appear, all things are both samsara and the state beyond all sorrow, come from nowhere. Nowhere do they go or stay, arising in dependence based on their fundamental nature. Things seem to arise and then to cease, and yet they're empty in the very instant of appearing. To rest in no conceptual extreme is set forth as the middle way itself. So in these verses here that we'll just briefly cover with Kangyur Rinpoche's commentary, Jigme Lingpa is expounding the nature of things. And then at the end, he says to rest without any conceptual extremes, meaning without taking some sort of conceptual idea about things, to simply just rest without the what we call elaborations that attribute some sort of identity, either existing, non-existing, and so on. This is what we call the conceptual extremes, and to rest free from that. That's what we mean with the middle way. So we'll go into some depth with that in the commentary. But as you can hear, this is really, you could say, the heart of what the Buddha is trying to tell us. So again, I'm going a little bit back. We had actually arrived to stanza 144, but let me just briefly go through this again. You'll have to apologize. For me, this is something that actually sort of slowly has seeped in over time. And so that's where I'm thinking, if you're like me, then you might also appreciate to have these sort of things sort of reiterated. So Kangyur Rinpoche comments then, the meaning of the treasury of the scriptures is that all the phenomena of the ground, path, and fruit arise interdependently. That means our experience on the path and in general is all something that has to do with us being engaged in a reality that exists on the basis of causes and conditions. If from listening to the teachings, we gain a clear understanding of this interdependence, and if we are then able to bring together the key points and penetrate them with the wisdom that results from reflection, a wisdom that is uncontaminated by adhering to extreme views, we will have in our possession, so to speak, a key with which to open the door to the scripture's profound meaning. So that's where we introduce to the principle of the way things are, suchness, where we what keeps us in samsara is failing to see the suchness of things. And engaging this is vipassana. This is the foundation for all the vehicles, whether we call it Zen or vipassana and so forth. If we're talking about the Vajrayana, this is the basis of the deity. This is the place from which the deities arrive. This is the place from which all compassion and the purity of phenomena arise and are seen, understood. So now there's dependent arising with regard to the ground nature. All phenomena, all false and deceptive appearances, the fluctuating compoundedness of life, samsara with its karma and defilements, and indeed the liberation from suffering that we call nirvana are names superimposed on the ultimate nature. So the nature itself is unchanging, whether we get it or not. That's what has us caught in samsara or being free. But the nature itself doesn't change. So whether we, with our filters, we're experiencing the nature through kleshas and the karmic projections, or whether we are free from this in the condition of awakening, that doesn't change the ultimate nature. The conditions of samsara and nirvana, these are just superimpositions on the ultimate nature. It says, as to their origin, they arise from nowhere. As to their sensation, they go nowhere. And in the meantime, they have no place of abiding, meaning phenomena. From the outset, phenomena dwell in the same essential equality of the three times. They arise in interdependence, and interdependence that is rendered possible by their ultimate nature. So phenomena arise as they will, according to however we are. We all look different. We all have different colors, shapes, sizes, and so on. And also, we experience things differently. And we have the realms of samsara, we have the conditions of freedom, nirvana, and so forth. But whatever it is that plays out, nothing ever comes into true existence. Everything abides within this, what we call essential equality. So it says they arise in interdependence, an interdependence that is rendered possible by their ultimate nature, meaning they can go anywhere. It's by the very nature of being simply just a set of causes and conditions, it can manifest in so many different ways, as we can see how we all are different. We all experience differently. It is written in the Pitiputra Samagama Sutra, phenomena are equal in the equality of the three times. Okay, let's see what. Oh yeah, beyond coming and yeah, they do not originate, they do not dwell, they do not cease. Meaning, while they appear, there's no real existence that takes place. So we're not talking about something originating, staying for a while, and then ceasing, which is how we ordinarily appear. Things appear to us, right? But in the absence of true existence, there's no real existence taking place. And that's why we talk about that phenomena, as much as they appear, they're equal in being, you could say, uncreated. So, Kangyur Rinpoche then says, this could be expressed in another way by saying that all phenomena seem to arise from origins and ending in extinction. So that's what we might think. But in the very moment of their manifestation, they are without inherent existence. So that's the point. These appearances, which are empty by nature, arise unobstructedly, meaning anything can happen, anything can arise, simply just due to the particular prevailing causes and conditions. Yet, ontologically, in terms of how they are, there is no reality. They are untouched by the ontological extremes of existence, non-existence, and so forth. Existence and non-existence, these are labels that we give to things from the point of view of attributing a reality to them. But phenomena don't have that nature. If through wisdom one gains a profound conviction that this is so, one will realize that all that appears within the sphere of the common consensus is without inherent existence, meaning the world that we all experience. It is a mere imputation of the mind and is based on emptiness. This is the teaching of the Majjhimaka path, in which there is no place for extreme ontological assertions. So that's again, this reality is not understood through some cerebral construction, through philosophy, through ideas, or through language. And this has everything to do with our understanding of reality. So that's where we need to actually confront our beliefs, which have, for the most part, most of us live within a culture that subscribes to an ontological vision vastly different from this. So we can't really run away from the fact that we need to actually look at how do we understand reality. And we need to actually challenge the assumptions that we've been used to, brought up with, and assume as being sort of real. We're surrounded by institutions that will tell us that phenomena have this kind of reality. So that's where we actually, as Buddhists, in terms of asserting the view, we actually need to not necessarily, you could say, be at war with, but just simply understood that these kind of wrong views that prevail, they come about due to various causes and conditions. And so it's not about good or bad, but we also need to not be held or caught by these belief systems. So that, of course, applies to our sciences, our philosophies, the ideas that prevail and which are given to us from every angle, from every corner. So, so then 144, Jigme Lingpa writes, clean and unclean, both are adventitious. They don't exist in fact, and yet appear, though they are non-existent. They're seized upon through mental imputation. Analysis reveals these four extremes: existence, non-existence, permanence, and annihilation. So as much as we have particular ways of perceiving things, in fact, they never really, these ways that we perceive things come from our own particular subjective optics, our own projections. So Kangyur Rinpoche then comments, he says, true and fundamental reality is beyond the categories of pure and impure. Nevertheless, though devoid of true existence, external and internal phenomena appear according to the habitual patterns set up by adventitious cognitive activity of the mind. So right now, our Buddha nature has never changed. I think most of us have heard that. The ground nature is primordially pure. But nevertheless, we are temporarily confused by these fleeting, passing, adventitious obscurations that blind us. So that's where it's so important, and I'm always quoting Tongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, who said the most important thing in taking refuge is understanding that our confusion is removable. That's the most important. When we take refuge in the Buddha, that's the main point. That's what the Buddha has to tell us. We're curable. We're not a lost cause. So, nevertheless, we do have this passing condition, the cognitive veil that is adventitious, temporary. So that's where we have this situation according to our particular style of projections, habitual patterns. But Kangyur Rinpoche says, but in reality, there is nothing. These appearances are organized dualistically and are considered to exist inherently, some apprehended as subject and some as object. So there we are experiencing our particular situation, which is very much about us having a sense that I exist and the other exists. So these sort of appearances, it says they are seized upon as things to accept or reject. I like, I don't like, and so on. To accomplish or to avoid. And this, of course, is not just about subtle, you could say, liking and disliking and attachment and aversion, but of course, it's everything that we come across, every micro moment. We have attachment and aversion from the really subtle, I don't know if I like the weather today, to right up to the big things that really are huge for us, whether it's huge joys or huge tragedies. All of that exists in terms of this particular parameter of subject and object, things that we accept or reject. Thus, we wander endlessly, caught in uninterrupted sequences of false appearances and false cognitions. Proponents of philosophical tenets, so the various sort of systems that we might have, spiritual, whether Buddhist or non-Buddhist, Actually, philosophical tenets is not just spiritual. It's also, yeah, philosophical and also, of course, what we might call scientific. So systems of knowledge, whether Buddhist or non-Buddhist, have reflected upon the nature of reality and repeatedly investigated it. That's what philosophers do. This is inquiry. That's what inquiry does, right? But inquiry doesn't necessarily mean that we arrive at an accurate conclusion. If our inquiry is all about finding what is the building blocks of our reality, then there's an assumption that there is something there. Because the assumption is, oh, but it all seems so real. There must be something there that builds it. And that's where the Buddha says, no, that's the wrong kind of question to ask. It's not about, is there something? It's about, how do we come to experience these things even more deeper in terms of our experience of things? Not just assuming something out there in the extended objects, but in the experience of the most primitive, you could say, ontological dimension of our reality, what we know, consciousness. How is it that consciousness comes to, what are the conditions that create this perception? And that's where then it's not always that they get it right, but failing to comprehend the absence of ontological extremes. And that is failing to understand that things actually don't have some sort of ultimate reality. These systems take on one of the four possible positions, with either overshoot the mark or fall short of it, attribute some reality, existence, or fall short of it, say, oh, there's nothing. And this we can even see within the discourse of modernity in terms of what used to be seen as something, the great narratives that created our civilization, and then the sort of postmodern, post-truth, nihilist view that we're just a random occurrence in a meaningless, sort of a chaotic universe. So we have these extremes. He says here we are referring on the one hand to those Buddhist schools which attribute true existence to either the outer object or the inner mind, or which by negating entities on the coarse level and refuting duality of subject and object express the ultimate reality as mere emptiness and non-affirming negative. So what I was just talking about, that's more sort of as it exists within our culture, but even within the Buddhist tradition, then there still are those that would, what we call the Vibhashika and Sautrantika systems, and what we in the Mahayana refer to as the Hinayana schools. And again, please don't begin to point fingers at some real existing tradition like the Theravadan tradition and say, oh, that's the Hinayanists. But within the Mahayana, our understanding then appreciates that there is those schools that would say, oh yeah, there's still atoms, or there's still moments of consciousness. So that's where there's some ultimate reality that is still substantial. And then there's also those that would say, well, when we analyze, we don't find anything. And that's where we then say, well, they end up with what's called a non-affirming negative, meaning just saying, oh, there's nothing. Because there are then schools within the Mahayana that would then say, oh yeah, that's reality is that there's nothing there. And that exists also. So on the other hand, so that's the Buddhist systems. But on the other hand, there are proponents of the non-Buddhist tenets. Some propound a theory of the eternal and unchanging Purusha and Prakriti. And so that's referring to the Samkhya tradition in the Indian schools, which attribute an ultimate nature, Prakrit, and from that then there's a consciousness that either understands or doesn't understand that nature. So that's where they then refer to these natures as being something that is eternal and ultimately real. Others hold the nihilistic view that phenomena existing here and now are purely random and that there is no causality and no past and future lives. And that lands pretty much in the discourse of the modern world. You only live once, or this is all there is, or, life is a bitch and then you die. End of story. You can't do much about it. So that kind of nihilism exists, is simply just saying, "Oh, I just believe in what I can see, touch, and feel," without any understanding of the perception that's involved, the consciousness that is generating an image on the basis of what is perceived. So without any understanding of that, there's no understanding of really the way that the unseen nature of consciousness is contributing to our sense of reality. And that's also where one attributes ultimate reality to what is perceived as material. And when you only look at the material, then of course you're not going to, then you just say, well, when the brain is dead, then that's the end of everything and there's no past and future lives. You're just sort of a brain that came into existence and then miraculously some consciousness came about. And when the brain is dead, then that's the end of it. So that's where we can see all of these really come from not actually experiencing reality, but simply just generating these ideas. And that is what we call ontological extremes. So that's where we want to grow up a little bit and go beyond that. Now it says, even those abiding, this is 145, even those abiding in the middle are not wise. For just like silkworms cased within their own silk, they're tangled in their tenets and assertions. So that's where even those that uphold the middle way, they could very well become very conceited or, fixated on their own ideas, their own middle way ideas. So it says, in addition to all this, if one intellectually elaborates a position that is free from extremes and calls it the middle way, proudly upholding it as supreme, this is a sign that one has failed to master the ultimate meaning. So that's where we could have the middle way view, but again, if it really just remains as an idea without being put into practice, then we have a sad situation. And here then it says, intellectuals, it's quoting the Samadhi-Raj Sutra, intellectuals asserting being and non-being, who thus investigate, will find no peace from suffering. Is and is not, pure, impure, are both extremes positions. But even in the middle, the wise forbear to dwell. So that's where, as followers of the Madhyamika, the middle way, we might have asserted that, in fact, these extreme positions are flawed. But if we then assert the middle way in terms of the cerebral or intellectual understanding of the middle and dwell on that, then we're equally in trouble. Then we're like the silkworms that have, beautiful silk, but we're caught up in it. So that's where that in itself doesn't help. So that's why even in the middle, the wise forbear to dwell. We sometimes talk about the non-dwelling middle way. And that's where we'd want to arrive at, something that is not about the intellect. Even we talk about the non-dwelling nirvana, also the ultimate goal of the path, does not result in somewhere that we then dwell. So it says here, those caught in the toils of their own views and tenets are like silkworms imprisoned in cocoons devised from their own saliva. 146. Phenomena, the things imputed by our minds, do not arise, nor do they cease or stay. They do not come, they do not go. They are not different, they are not the same. They are not permanent, and they are not annihilated. All conceptual theories regarding them subside. To know this as their very nature is the essence of the wisdom that arises from reflection. So, now, Kangyur Rinpoche says, but phenomena that are mere appearances and to which we impute real existence through the sheer power of our habits, are by their fundamental nature unoriginate. They are without origin. That's the first. They have no extinction. They have no dwelling. They arise from nowhere and go nowhere. And it is for this reason that the self, other, consciousness and its objects are neither the same nor are they different. They are not eternal, unchanging entities, nor do they have existence at the outset and fall to extinction at the end. The first 6 items of this list express non-affirming negatives, while the last 2 are affirming negatives. Phenomena in exclusion are by their very nature devoid of the 8 conceptual extremes. So the first 6, they then are simply saying there is nothing there. And the last set, there means that while there's an appearance, they're not something unchanging, or are they something that is subject to an extinction at the end. So that's where this actually is something that we come across in a famous praise of the Buddha, and it's pretty much verbatim what we're going to have from Kangyur Rinpoche. But if you look at the beginning of the Mula Madhyamika Karika, the verses of the middle way, then Nagarjuna famously praises the Buddha into this way, where he says, "To him who taught that things arise dependently, not ceasing, not arising, not annihilated, nor yet permanent, not coming, not departing, not different, not the same, the stilling of all thought and perfect peace. To him, the best of teachers, perfect Buddha, I bow down." So here we can see the first 6, the first 3 lines, not ceasing, not arising, not annihilated, nor yet permanent, not coming, not departing. That's talking in terms of things don't exist in these ways. The last is saying that not different, not the same, is that yes, you do have an appearance, but neither the idea of, for example, a self and an other, the self and the other, they're not the same, but they're also not different. And while they appear in such a way, they are not something that is entirely, you could say, untouched by each other. Or the way that we perceive objects have to do with ourselves, and yet it is not ourselves. We have this same also when we talk about, for example, if we look at in the objective experience of a seed, when the seed becomes a sprout, the sprout we wouldn't say is something entirely different, because if we have a rice seed, it's necessarily not going to be a pumpkin sprout that comes, but it's going to be according to the cause, it's going to be a rice sprout. So it's not different, but you can't say also that the rice seed and the rice sprout are the same. And so these imputations that we have, these ways that we label things as existing or non-existing, as being the same or different and so on, these are all our concepts that we attribute to reality. So that's where here Kangyur Rinpoche, also referring to this, says phenomena in conclusion are by their very nature devoid of the 8 conceptual extremes. And this, by the way, also we often will come across this notion where it says free from the 2 extremes, free from the 4 extremes, and free from the 8 the extremes. So here Kangyur Rinpoche quotes Nagarjuna as having said, all things then arise, all things then dependently arise. They have no ending and they have no origin. They are not nothing, nor are they everlasting. They do not come, they do not go. They are not different and they are not the same. Thus, the absence of conceptions is set forth. The mind that truly understands this fundamental reality, the natural state of things as it is, has in its possession the unmistaken wisdom that arises from reflection. Are there any questions here? I'd like to sort of, if there's any questions right away, let me know. And also, I would say, with regards to this, because it's something that you could say departs from the scientific or knowledge, the scientific tradition, our modern knowledge tradition, to such an extent, then it's something that you could say is food for thought. So I would say I'm happy to take questions right now, by all means. Just unmute yourself or chat, put something in the chat. But I also say take it with you, and then also have some questions ready for next time. If there's, because this is sort of an important point in terms of the understanding of the Buddhist teaching.
Jakob, when they list the 10 parameters, they insert primordial wisdom. So what is the difference of this type of wisdom, which is the 6th parameter, which is it that this comes from reflection?
When you have the divisions of the 6 and 10 parameters, the ensuing final 6, they're sort of more subtle aspects really of the 6, and it's just degrees in which this realization takes place. But we generally distinguish between the 6th parameter, number 6, which is called prajna, and then the 10th parameter, which is called jhana. And the 10th, the jhana, we would say, is something that's inherent. It's generally sort of understood as synonymous with Buddha nature. Whereas prajna, that's Manjushri's sword that cuts through. So of course it originates from jhana. It has its root in jhana, but it is what is, you could say, actively what cuts our confusion. And that's what we're cultivating here. Yeah.
I understand. Thank you.
Okay. Shall we get back to the text then? There's a little bit left here. Let's see. Okay, then we have the dependent arising of samsara and the dependent arising of nirvana. So one is essentially, how did we get here and how are we going to get out of here? So 147 says, all appearing objects, earth and water, fire and wind and space, mountains, forest groves and towns, all such compounded things arise from the respective causes. Samsara thus arises in dependence. So this refers to the gross dualistic phenomena that we experience. And this is just our world as we know it. Kangyur Rinpoche comments, he says, all that appears on the conventional level to the deluded mind, the 4 elements of earth, air, fire, and water, appearing within the bosom of open space, which is then the 5th element, and all particular objects, such as mountains, woods, villages, pitchers, woolen cloth, yak hair fabric, soil, bamboo, and so forth. So that's everything, from our detergent to the roof on our house, to the flue of our neighbor, and so forth, our health, everything, our thoughts, whatever there is, yeah? All such compounded things arise from their respective causes. In the outer world, phenomena occur due to the interdependence of 12 factors. So, consider, for example, a plant which manifests in dependence on 6 main causal factors: root, stem, branches, leaves, flowers, and fruit, coupled with 6 circumstantial factors, namely the 5 elements, in conjunction with time, as expressed in the changing of the seasons. Let me just say that there's a sutra I'm often referring to, which is called the rice seedling. the Salistamba Sutra, which has been recently excellently translated by the 84,000. And in there, actually, the Buddha talks about this in terms of the 12 links of dependent arising, or rather, talks about how causation takes place. It's a dialogue between, I think, Subhuti and Maitreya. But it's all about first asserting how externally then rice seedling, as the sutra is called, how things come to exist in the outer world, looking at the cause, which is there in the seed, but also then the contributing circumstances. So causes and conditions. And that's where we look at it in the external world, and also we look at it in the internal world in terms of our experience. How did we get here? And that's where we then talk about the 12 links of dependent arising. So in terms of the external world, which is then, like we saw here, the root, stem, branches, etc., and the conditions that are necessary, he says, when all these 12 factors are present and complete, as long as one still retains the propensity to perceive external appearances, the phenomenon plant will continue to manifest. Thus, the outer world is the result of 12 interdependent links. Let's just see what the footnotes here says. Emphasis here is placed on interdependence rather than on the number 12. It is a statement of evolutionary causality arranged in symmetrical formula, parallel to the 12-fold cycle of dependent causation as occurrent in the existence of sentient beings. So it says here, CDS28, I'm not sure what that is, where Dutrumba just says that outer dependent arising can be understood by analyzing from where phenomenal results have arisen. Yeah. But again, I would warmly recommend the Rice Seedlings Sutra. It's just called the Rice Seedling. If you go into 84,000 in the reading room, just say Rice Seedling, you'll have it there. It's not that long. It's about 10 pages or something, but it's really, really interesting. And the thing is, this again lies at the heart of everything that we are really uncovering on the Buddhist path in terms of understanding our reality. So that's the external one. Then let's look at the internal. It says 148, because there's ignorance, conditioning factors manifest. And likewise, every link is based on the preceding one. They all unfold till age and death is reached. Such is dependent arising in the inner sense. So now we're looking at then the 12 links of dependent arising. It says, in the same way, from ignorance derive conditioning factors, which in turn give rise to consciousness and so forth. So when you have the wheel of existence, the Bhava chakra with the great Mara holding this great circle here on the outer rim, you see the description of you see these 12 represented in various figures. The 12 interdependent links gradually unfold, each link based on the one preceding it. They are seamlessly connected without interruption until aging and death. This is how life, quote, goes on from beginningless time until the moment when the propensities of mind and body are exhausted. This describes the 12-link dependent arising on the inner level. So we're looking at how causes and conditions play out in the external world, and we're looking at how causes and conditions play out in terms of our experience as individuals. And that's where, again, in all the traditions of Buddhism, we really study this way in which ignorance gives rise to then experience and confused experience that then creates the sense of an individual experiencing a real world, and as such then going through the parameters of existence, including then having a birth, being getting old and dying, and this then continuing. So there we have it. So this is what we call the dependent arising of samsara. Now, the dependent arising of nirvana, well, this means nirvana obviously is not something that needs to be constructed. If we're talking about enlightenment, it's Buddha nature, it's the primordial ground. But for us to get there means that we actually need to deal with our situation. We need to start where we are, so to speak. So that's where we then need to practice the path in order to unravel this confusion. So that's where the process of the path comes into play. So Jigme Lingpa says, nirvana, which arises in dependence, rests in both the paths and their result. To speak then of these paths, when ignorance, the root of the 12 links, arrange in forward order, leading to samsara, and then 150, is vanquished through wisdom of awareness, conditioning factors and the other links are, in their order, also overturned, thus severing the root of all existence. So where we normally have what we call the forward causation of samsara on the basis of ignorance, we then have what's called the reverse causation. We reverse this causation by, rather than being, you could say, proceeding through ignorance, we proceed with awareness. And within the awareness, then the conditions for our confused existence then unravels. Then the samskaras, or the conditioning factors, consciousness, and so on, they're then dissolved, and that's where we sever the root of samsara. So Kangyur Rinpoche says that the depending arising of nirvana. Let's just see what we have here. This is from Yönten Gyatso. It says, the notion of interdependence can also be applied to nirvana. For even though nirvana is not a product newly contrived on the basis of compounded phenomena, it is through the accomplishment of the path that adventitious obscurations are removed, that nirvana is actualized, and the creative virtuosity of uncompounded wisdom manifests unhindered. Yeah. So this dependent arising of nirvana consists in the 4 successive paths of learning, together with the resultant stage, the path of no more learning. You know, often we talk about the 5 paths, and sometimes we refer to this also as the 4 paths of learning, and the 5th path, which is there's no more learning taking place. So it really is all about the 4 paths of learning, which is the path of accumulation, the path of joining, the path of seeing, and the path of meditation. So we've mentioned that quite a few times. So that's essentially what creates nirvana, in the sense of that which eliminates, what veils the Buddha nature, or the abiding purity. The root of the 12-linked chain, which proceeds from ignorance to aging and death, right? You know, on the rim of samsara, those, you could say, those 12, is concomitant with the arising of samsara. So that means that is ignorance of the ultimate meaning of the 2 truths. So that's the fundamental, simply just not understanding reality. Sometimes we say ignorance is the failing to understand the 4 noble truths. Here we say the 2 truths, but it really just means that we fail to understand what our mind can do. In the case of the 4 noble truths, when we don't understand that, it's basically not understanding what it is that drives suffering, meaning suffering and its cause, and not understanding what it is that drives freedom, the cessation and the cause of cessation, the path. So that's where when we talk about ignorance, it's simply just not understanding the nature of where we are. Now, it says here, by listening to the teachings and reflecting on them, while on the path of accumulation, practitioners come to a full understanding of the antidote to ignorance, the wisdom of awareness that realizes the no-self of persons and phenomena. So that's what we're presently doing here with this study, with us engaging in the wisdom of hearing and reflecting. And that's where we want to arrive at understanding what is it that drives confusion, what sets us free. And once we know that, then we then understand what is going to be the antidote to our condition of ignorance. And so that's this wisdom of awareness that realizes the no self of persons and phenomena. While on the path of joining, and by means of the 5 factors of faith, diligence, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, the practitioner meditates on emptiness by way of a mental image. So that's what we also sometimes refer to as the enumerated or the categorized absolute. We have an idea where this is going. However, the result of this is that ignorance is attenuated. It's that image of it, that sort of, you could say, the notion, just knowing that phenomena are empty. That's an antidote that helps us not be caught by phenomena. And that's where ignorance is sort of, you could say, it's reined in. Now then, on the path of seeing, the third path, the practitioner beholds the wisdom of awareness directly and in its true nature. As a result, no further karma is ignorantly accumulated, and therefore no further existence is set in motion. While on the 9 grounds, and then from that onwards, then the Bodhisattva has, the famous bhumis, right? While on the 9 grounds of the path of meditation, the practitioner trains continually in this wisdom and intensifies its power, with the result that the habitual tendencies of ignorance are finally brought to a halt. By virtue of this, the habitual tendencies of conditioning factors, together with the other links of the 12-fold chain, are halted in reverse order. So that means then when there's no more ignorance, which is number 1 in the chain, then number 2 in the chain, which are the conditioning factors, and what comes from that then are halted. They are stopped. Finally, when the last stage of the 10th ground is reached by means of the diamond-like concentration, or sometimes called the Vajra-like samadhi, all extremely subtle tendencies to ignorance, the very root of samsara, together with the perception of mere appearances, will be discarded and their continuity severed. Okay, let's see what they say here. Meaning the lingering appearance of phenomena as separate from the perceiver, even after the beliefs of their true existence has been abandoned. So that's why right up to the very end, Bodhisattvas still have this sense of self and other, even though it's you could say the strength of it is minimal. So when this happens, the wisdom of the Dharmakaya will be actualized and unbounded compassion will manifest, able to assume any form. All this amounts to the interdependence of the fruit. So that's where we then talk about then the fruition and the nirvana that has been attained. And while nirvana was there from the very start, or Buddha nature was there from the very start, there were still these fleeting, adventitious obscurations, which then on the basis of this process, this interdependent process, or these conditions, then they have been removed. So that's the interdependence of nirvana. Yeah, the dependent arising of nirvana. It says 151. We can just take this last one. Those who understand the nature of arising independence, knowing suffering, reject its origin, they effect cessation and behold the supreme path. So this is then, you could say, where the Four Noble Truths really show the quality of this extremely profound insight that the Buddha had, understanding our mind as something that you could say can go either way. It can go into confusion and it can also be free. And that's where he identified the suffering that there is, but that it's caused. Understanding that liberation is basic to who we are, but we need to effectuate the cause for that liberation. These are the Four Noble Truths. So Kangyur Rinpoche comments, from this it follows that the ground, path, and fruit are interdependent. In themselves, they have no real inherent existence. Those who correctly realize this know also that true sufferings, namely the universe and its inhabitants, manifest simply by virtue of dependent arising and are without true existence. They know that by abandoning the cause of suffering, ignorance, the root of defilement, the truth of origin, they understand that by abandoning this cause of suffering, and through doing that, then what happens is the truth of cessation or supreme nirvana is actualized. Thus, they meditate upon the supreme wisdom of no self, the truth of the path, and behold it directly. So we can summarize the Four Noble Truths in understanding where that suffering originates from ignorance and liberation originates from this supreme wisdom of no self. So we'll leave it at that. If there's any questions? I think all of this that we're learning here it gives an idea of where the path is leading. There's no presumption that we right away immediately attain the wisdom of non-duality or you could say complete understanding of this. But even just observing how our life is continually dependent on things that happen from ourselves and you could say around us, this creates a sense of understanding how causes and conditions happen within our life. And that's where with the path, we're creating the causes and conditions for minimizing the confusion. So there's a very empowered perspective in this. You know, when we have the Buddha's teaching on understanding how things exist in relation, how things are based on causes and conditions, it's a message about that we can shape these causes and conditions. So if we fall under the power of ignorance and habit, then we're just continuing the sort of the circle of confusion. But if we are understanding what is it that sets us free, then we can create the causes and conditions for freedom. And that's what, of course, the message is. Okay, we'll conclude then with dedication. Let's just see if I can get it right. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world. May we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jakob. Thank you.
Thank you for attending.